Good afternoon, and just want to thank you for the opportunity and the privilege of sharing with you this afternoon on the particular theme that you have asked me to talk about, issues around Lobola in the postmodern age, the relevance thereof. Now, when we look into the system of lobola or dowry or a bride price, it goes all the way back to the Bible times. We saw Abraham sending his servant with gifts and presents when to go and get a wife for Isaac. We saw Jacob also paying 7 years' wages as a form of a lobola to his uncle, and another 7 years for the other woman. And it can also be said that this whole idea of lobola or paying a bride price goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We see God could have created Eve from any other quarter, from any other material, but he chose to use a rib from Adam. So it can also be said that Adam paid lobola with his own rib for Eve, and we see immediately thereafter they are married, very much like an African process where a man pays lobola and then the marriage can get started. If we look at the love story at the cross, if we look at it again in the context of Jesus being the groom and the church being the bride, we see again Jesus seeming to follow that story, the African way of coming the first time to make a proposal to the bride and then paying at the cross a lobola with his own blood and going to prepare a place to come to fetch his bride, which is the church. I'm fascinated by the idea when we look into our practice of lobola or zekiso, as we say it in Venda. I'm fascinated by this fact that even though we have lost many of our cultural practices because of Christianity or civilization or modernization or even colonization, for some reason the lobola practice has remained. In fact, it seems like it is the only time that many of us practice any form of cultural practice. It is when we come to the issue of lobola and the payment thereof. It seems like we live in the Western world until we have to get married and we are reminded of our own cultural practices. While Western culture have replaced, obviously, many of our cultural practices, for some strange reason, the Western culture added instead of replacing what was our own culture or our own practices. So it didn't replace the idea of paying lobola and the traditional ways of doing things. We just added something called a white wedding. In recent time, we have added something called cultural weddings. But in reality, the cultural wedding should have replaced the white wedding, but that's a debate of another day. One thing that is important for us is to realize is that according to the laws of the land today in this country, and I imagine in a number of other countries in Southern Africa, you can get married without paying lobola. You see, the requirements for a civil marriage does not require consent for parents. As long as you are 18 years and above, you can actually go find your fiance or your girlfriend, go with two friends to Home Affairs and get married, and Home Affairs will not ask you if you have paid Lobola or not, because Lobola is not a requirement in a civil marriage. So in this age and time, young people pay Lobola because of the respect of their parents and because of the respect of the culture. So Lobola is only a requirement in a customary marriage, not in a civil marriage. Those who listened some few weeks ago, we were talking about when does marriage start. So I had to do a breakdown and a distinction between civil marriages and customary marriages, which is a debate of another day. But most of us as Africans, we get married twice because we follow the customary ways of doing things, and then we get married the civil way, But the fact of the matter is that you could have gotten married and it will be legal without paying Lobola, without talking to parents, just the two of you. It is done because we respect our parents and we respect the culture. Now, the challenge today is not whether to pay Lobola or not, whether we should accept our culture and continue with our cultures or not. The challenge today, according to me, is the abuse of the Lobola practice. Our parents and uncles are abusing this beautiful culture. Let's go back to a time when African ways of practices, their currency was a cattle. Cattle was a form of currency, and every family had some cattle. So back then, if they say Lobola is 10 cows, depending on the culture, some will say 8 up to 11, some up to 12, depending on the different cultures. Even the poorest of the poor was able to afford to pay that number of cows. In fact, those who were poor and who will look after the cattle of others, they will be told that whenever there is 10 calves, the next one is your payment. So you'll get a 10% as form of your payment of the calves that you're looking after. And in 2-3 years, you have actually raised enough money to pay the 10 cows or so that are required for you to get married. So marriage was accessible even to the poorest of the poor. Then came colonization and the modern era and the repressive cultures. Our cattle were stolen from us, leaving us without any stock, any of the cattle that we used to have before. But even though our cattle have been stolen and has been taken away from us, an African at the same time discovered money and we start using money, but somehow an African continues to ignore what has happened to the cattle economy and insist that Lobola must be based in the currency of a cattle. Even though our livestock has been taken away, it's no longer there. It used to be as it used to be in the days gone by. Suddenly marriage, which was even accessible to the poorest of the poor, is no longer affordable to an average young man unless he gets himself into debt to get married. To make things worse, the Western form of greed and materialism entered the Lobola practice. And we know that greed has permeated every form of society. Now this also entered the process and the practice of Lobola. And out of this greed, we are now told that the value of the woman is based on her Lobola price. If we go back to the purpose and the idea of marriage in the African culture, it was not a sale of a woman. The African culture, our marriages were arranged. So what we did was, it was a coming together of two families. It was a bond of two families, more than a transaction or a financial transaction or a cattle transaction. That even some young women who suffer from short-sightedness, myopia, feel that their lobola, if their lobola is too low, it means their families have a low view of them, or they view them cheaply. The fact of the matter is that there is no correlation between a high lobola price and marital success. However, there is a correlation, scientific proof, that shows a relationship between financial challenges or indebtedness of the family and the high divorce rate. Traditionally, let's look at traditionally, lobola served two purposes. Firstly, it was a gift, a sign of gratitude to the family that has raised the young woman. Secondly, it was a way for us as a family to prove that the young man will be able to provide for the young woman. So it was a way for the young man to prove himself that will be able to provide. If he cannot afford the basic 8 cows or 10 cows or 11 cows, how will he provide for the wife? Considering the fact that we have already said, even the poorest of the poor, in 2-3 years, he will be able to raise enough cattle to get married. Today, lobola has become a business transaction. People are trying to profiteer by selling their daughters. And we are told all kinds of nonsense, like the young lady has studied at West University, has got a master's degree, and all kinds of related stories. By the way, the young man might even have similar qualification as a woman. However, marriage is not employment. It's not the CV or the qualification of the young woman that matters, but the content of her character. In reality, if you are going to put a value on a woman or on the wife, we should have been valuing that based on the content of the character, not the contents of the CV. The kinds of lobola prices that we hear today are scary. We're talking about 100,000 K plus, which is ridiculous, and an abuse of tradition. In South Africa, it is common that the north you go, the cheaper the lobola, and the south you go, the more expensive it is. And further down south, it is even very expensive. So, as a result, many young men have to get into debt in order to get married, or they choose to cohabit instead of getting married. Now, if a young man is going to marry my daughter, and let's consider that he is a God-fearing, he loves the Lord and he's committed to serving the Lord, why would I complicate his life by getting him into debts for him to be my son or one who is marrying my daughter? Why do I have to complicate his life? Why would I like my daughter to suffer when her husband is busy paying the debt for the money he has to give to me? That I don't need the money, because I have already lived my life, I've already achieved whatever I needed to achieve, and they need to start life. But my greed as a parent makes sure that I make their life to suffer and my daughter to suffer for the years that the young man has to pay for the debt or the loan he had to take in order to get married to my daughter. If there are people who need money, should be the two of them. They are starting out life. They need all the financial support that they can ever get. And it's unfortunate that our greed and our desire to make money out of them and to corrupt this beautiful cultural practice of Lobola is not only responsible for in putting them into debt, but I would like to believe it's responsible for destroying marriages, because thereafter, even after they've paid Lobola, we demand that they do big weddings. In this age and time, we've got the madness of doing one cultural wedding and then another one white wedding, and all of those things put them into debts. And the first thing that they do when they get into their new marriage is to talk about the debt and their indebtedness. Even if they were not getting themselves into debt, so 100,000 towards Lobola, another 100,000 towards weddings, which is an understatement. I was talking to a man the other day, and he was telling me that the budget that they had, and this is not an exaggeration, the budget that they had for their wedding was R1,000,000. Now, I don't know what on earth you are doing with R1,000,000 being thrown on one day, even if it included their holiday, going wherever they were going to do a honeymoon, but it is crazy amount. So if we look into, even if they had the money in cash, that money, they could have used it to buy a house, to buy something else and start out on life. I'm of the view that if I find a young man, and I take him through my own assessment, thorough assessment, through lie detector and other means of scrutinizing him, and I'm happy with him and that he's a good young man for my daughter, I can just ask him. I said, come here. And I said to him, what do you have? How much do you have in your savings account at the moment? And if he says he's got 5,000 rand, I'll say to him, yeah, just bring the 5,000. It's fine. Let's sort out this here and now, and we are okay. And if after my assessment I found that not only is he a good young man, he is also a preacher of the gospel. Probably has conducted some crusades, and if he has won some souls, I can say to him, even 1,000 rand is okay. You can just bring the 1,000 and we are done. Because what do I want as a parent? I want the best future for them. Because as we said in the beginning, Lobola served two purposes. Firstly, it was a gift to the parent. So 1,000 rand to me as a gift, it's good enough. I'm fine. And secondly, we said it was a way of proving if the young man can provide. So he can bring me a pay slip and I can see that he works and he earns a salary and I'm happy with that. 1,000, we are sorted. Let him go and celebrate his life and have a good time with my daughter, because that's what marriage is supposed to be, giving them a better chance of starting out and succeeding in marriage instead of taking them into debts and indebtedness. And I was asked to do a brief intro. I thought that's what my few thoughts on the issue of Lobola in this current age and time, and I will take it back to whoever is the coordinator over there.
That was Mashudu Ravhengani, proudly brought to you by Living Power Ministries. You can find us at livingpower.org.za or on WhatsApp at +27 78 215 5737. Living Power, empowering mankind to unleash its full potential.